Now, to wrap up our Day 1 program, amid this election season, the next panel brings together key leaders to envision our next governor's climate agenda. Moderating this panel is LACI President and CEO Matt Petersen, and panelists include Mary Creasman, CEO of California Environmental Voters, Amisha Rai, Senior Vice President of Advanced Energy United, Liane Randolph, former chair of the California Air Resources Board, and also a former co-chair of LACI's Transportation Electrification Partnership, and Alvaro Sanchez, Senior Fellow and founder of Blueprints for Belonging at Just Solutions Collective.
All right. Give it up for that last panel again. We had some real great leaders. Of course, Mary Nichols is a legend and was sort of a co-founder of our Transportation Partnership, and appreciate all her work that she does on behalf of so many. This is a really exciting panel at the end of Day 1. We started the morning with Russell Westbrook, famous athlete and Angelino, an entrepreneur who is here to use his reach to inspire people, to be able to get more people engaged in what we're talking about here today. But we're really here to talk about the next governor. We know who the current governor is. Some of you used to work for him, and some other people in the audience work for him still. And we know how strong of a climate leader the governor's been. The previous governor, Jerry Brown, was as well, each in their own way. And we know the progress we have made despite what's going on in Washington. Nothing is going to slow down California. We will find a way through the sustained ambition that we've had on clean energy, zero-emission vehicles. We've laid the groundwork for setting goals to reach 100% carbon neutrality by 2045. The Newsom administration's moved the state forward in many areas. During the electricity reliability crisis, responding to that, increasing battery storage capacity by 2,100% to 17,100 megawatts, adding over 30,000 megawatts of new resources that support grid reliability and a clean energy future, growing EV sales to new heights in the state. And as 2023, over 2/3 of our state was powered by clean energy. Many of our days of the year are powered 100% by clean energy, which is amazing. Making, at the same time, we have the most ambitious climate policies of any state in the country and often around the globe. And we've grown our economy to be the 4th largest in the world. Yet we know we need to do a lot between now and the next administration to stay on track, and over the next 8 years, hopefully the next governor, if we think it is who it is, we expect it to be, will be leading the state for 8 years. At the same time, affordability is a growing item on the minds of Californians, sometimes being used as a political bludgeon, hammer to push back at the same time on climate policy. So it's a double-edged sword. But we also know we need to improve the resilience of our communities. The aging electric grid is, of course, a challenge that's been the source of many of our state's wildfires. And there's much more work to do. Before I open up the panel, tomorrow we'll officially release this white paper I mentioned at the beginning of the day. Just really at a conservative level shows that $11 billion has been invested just in LA County over the last 5 years alone in transportation electrification, building decarbonization, and other sectors. And we know here in LA what we do matters. We're the largest economy and the largest state in America. And what we do is critical to the state meeting its goals. But we cannot do it as a region without the leadership of the governor, of course, and the state legislature. So that's why we're having this conversation here today. We've brought thought leaders and advocates to discuss what the next governor should prioritize to keep the progress moving forward. And each is a leader in their own right. But I'm going to start with Alvaro. Recent polling shows, as I've said, that more and more people are worried about affordability, whether it's healthcare or housing, inflation. And at a high level, most of the top issues related to affordability and really are about income inequality at the same time, all before environmental priorities come to the top of their minds. What does this tell climate advocates of how we need to frame making climate a priority for the next administration?
Thanks, Matt. When I start this, I think I want to start with a quick poll. So I'd like to ask you all, how many of you wake up every day and think about the level of greenhouse gases that are in the air? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you wake up every day thinking about how many heat pumps and electric vehicles we can get people to adopt every day? Okay. How many of you wake up every day thinking about how are you going to afford the basics of life? How are you going to build economic prosperity for you and your family? And how are you going to leave this world better for the next generation rather than to this generation? Raise your hand. Great. So what I just saw here in this room is similar to what I've seen throughout the state for a year and a half. I've gone throughout the state talking to leaders, conducting polls, focus groups to ask, what do we do to bring climate advocacy in line with our ambitions for the future of the state of California? And I think what I hear from everyone is that everyone cares about the climate. But today, everybody's waking up every day wanting to work in an economy that works for everyone. And that's really the leading message that most people have. And I think an opportunity that we have as climate advocates is to make the case that our economic transition that we are experiencing, and we know we're experiencing one because of new technology, industries that are coming up, and just the ways that our regions are building up, is the same one as the energy transition that we're also experiencing. Those two things are one and the same. And they create opportunities for us to actually focus on the things that most people care about the most, affordability. Affordability is not just about reducing the cost of things, it's also about giving people the opportunity to afford things that just cost more. And so often we focus on one end of affordability without focusing on the other. And when we focus on both ends of that conversation, we can also leverage the investments that we need to make in order to build the resilience of the state against the impacts of climate change, because we know, as we've heard today over and over again, the return on investment on making the investments necessary to fight climate impacts actually produce a lot of benefits for saving in things that we otherwise would have to spend for emergency preparedness and response, allowing people to build the kinds of businesses, workforce opportunities, and economic drivers that will help them in the long run. And we're able to ultimately create healthier, more thriving, more prosperous communities. So for the next governor of California, I think a case that we would want to make to them is that we need to treat these issues as the recipe for how we want to live, how we want to have a more prosperous California, and bring an economic transition conversation in alignment with an energy transition conversation, which we've already made a lot of progress on. So there's tons of opportunities for us to make that case, and I think if we are able to articulate that case, then we can get closer to what people really care about, which will allow us then to have more ambition around the climate policies that we move forward in the future.
Thank you. So really kind of framing climate issues in the context of kitchen table issues of really the people sit around and talk about, whether it's the kitchen table or while they're on their cell phone talking to each other or communicating, sharing Instagram videos. How do we make it an issues they relate with? I'm board chair at Climate Mayors and our EDs here, Kate Wright, and we talk about that all the time about how do we make these issues kitchen table issues. Mary, your organization is so important to keep track, and hold accountable our elected officials, particularly in the legislature, in tracking who are climate champions and who are not. There's so many forces out there trying to keep things status quo, if not roll them back. And you're a voice for keeping moving forward. And what should California voters keep in mind at the ballot box in November, and how can we build the political will for more climate action?
Thank you. And thank you for having this conversation. We always know that elections have consequences. But this November, we have some extra consequences because whoever we elect as governor will be our governor likely for the next 8 years. I want to answer the question about what voters need to be thinking about. But before I do that, I want to kind of flip that to say what candidates need to be thinking about. Because we have a history here in California of taking our Democratic voters for granted. We have a history here of assuming Democrats will turn out for Democrats, Republicans will turn out for Republicans. That's the way it goes. People are going to turn out in a big election. The reality is that is not the case. In November 2024, what we saw was 2 million less voters turned out in that presidential that had a top of a ticket from California. They didn't believe their vote mattered. They didn't believe California was going to be a difference maker at the top of the ticket. In June 2026, the election we just finished, we had almost 40% turnout. That means that's the highest turnout we've had in a primary since 1998. That means voters are engaged. They are paying attention, just as Alvaro said. They're like, fix it. But here's what I would say. We can't take them for granted because progressive voters care about this issue, and they will not turn out if they don't feel like their vote matters. In a top-of-the-ticket race with a Democrat and a Republican, in a scenario where voters could assume the Democrat is going to win, there is a world in which we don't get a good turnout for November. And that has implications up and down the ballot. Voters need a vision that they can buy into to get them to turn out. It is incumbent upon candidates, especially candidates at the top of the ticket, our likely next governor, to put forward a vision that connects the critical issues voters care about. That's what it's going to take. Gubernatorial candidates have to drive turnout that are going to impact House races, state legislative races, and local races. That's the responsibility for gubernatorial candidates. And I will say this, it's not a guessing game on what they care about. The top issue for voters right now is corporate accountability connected to cost reduction. We like to say affordability. That's not what voters are saying. Voters are saying cost reduction. And we know through, I know Alvaro's done so many polls, we've done so many polls, we've done so many focus groups, probably 10 different projects in the last year. Voters are connecting the dots between what's happening with extreme events and what's happening with their bills. And so candidates that come forward with that vision and with a real compelling agenda is what's going to drive turnout. Now, what voters need to do is voters need to see through the money. That's voters' job. It's candidates' job to have a compelling vision that meets voters and is authentic to what voters want and reflects voters' agenda. But voters have to see through the money. We saw unprecedented oil spending in the primary. Year after year after year, oil spending has skyrocketed. And the reason why is this. We'll get into more of this later. Their agenda at this point is to have government prop up the fossil fuel industry. 2/3 of our energy is now clean energy. You heard it said. Refineries are closing. They see the end. Their agenda is to buy elected officials and to make sure that government is propping up the fossil fuel industry. So voters' job is to see through where the money is going and find the candidates who haven't been bought out by the fossil fuel industry.
They're here. Thanks for the straight talk, Mary, as always. Liane, you were recently, until recently, CARB chair, and you obviously played many other roles at the Public Utilities Commission, but in the context of CARB, you spent a lot of time thinking about how do we achieve these statewide goals and the policy levers CARB has. But you also began, in different phases of your role, experience headwinds from the federal government. What do you think the next governor should prioritize as they come on board next year?
Well, I guess I would start by kind of echoing something Mary just said, which is, be really clear about your vision. I think it's really important for the next governor to be very, very clear that, they will be the 4th governor of California who has worked very hard on the climate issue. And so it's absolutely critical that this governor out of the gate makes it very clear that this work is going to continue. And there's a lot of sort of detailed programs that I want to make sure continue to move. But I think setting that clear statement and goal, I think, is really important. And we have a lot of great legislation, a lot of great targets that we are implementing. And so I think it's critical for the new governor to be focused on the next steps for all of that. Don't take continued progress for granted. Keep pushing that implementation forward. One thing I think is very important for the governor to prioritize at that intersection of affordability and climate is housing, right? Is looking at continued ways that we can build more housing in California. We can have more transit-oriented development. We can have more density and create a vision of a California where we are not burning as much fossil fuels as we're moving around the state to jobs and recreation. And, you know, in sort of one of the things I think is really important thinking about the federal government is, as we think about programs the state continues to work on, my former agency, CARB, is currently grappling with this question of what's our next set of vehicle standards. Our existing vehicle standards are all tied up in court, and the US EPA continues to attack emission standards that automakers have already complied with. They have submitted to Congress rules that have been in existence for years because they want to take away CARB's fundamental right to require certification of clean vehicles. And so the new administration needs to continue to fight that battle, but also needs to talk about the future of vehicle regulations and to make sure that that conversation, that highly technical, what are we going to do next conversation, continues to happen and continues to move forward. So it's a lot of work, but I know that we as a state can continue to hold the new administration accountable and say, yeah, we do want to continue to see climate progress, and we want to figure out ways for climate progress to benefit communities, to benefit individuals, and to really hammer home the message that our affordability challenges in California are not caused by climate action. Full stop. That is not what is causing the state's affordability challenges. And you know, to getting to Alvaro's point, like getting to the root cause of some of those, getting to those policy questions about having enough housing, about tackling income inequality, those are the things that the governor, the new administration needs to focus on, and being clear about those goals is job one.
Here. Thank you, Liane. Yeah, I mean, we continue to find ourselves backpedaling when we try to respond to the challenge that climate policies are creating the affordability crisis, when we know that's not the case. Certainly in California, we've grown our economy while creating the most aggressive climate policies in the country, if not in the world. Amisha, much of energy progress and policy in California is abstract to everyday Californians. I mean, we talked about that this morning with Russell Westbrook, like from him becoming an advocate into this space and using his voice to raise awareness. These are things that necessarily people may not connect the dots to begin with, let alone think about the complex policy-making process that we do have, whether it's at ARB or the PUC or in the legislature. And you know, by the way, we had a great legislator here earlier, Ben Allen. I don't know if he's left, but Ben deserves an enormous amount of credit for leading on so many climate policies. Amisha, how can California's next governor leverage people-centric solutions to meet the capacity and reliability challenges of today's grid?
First, thank you to the LACI team for having us all here. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with this crew. A lot has already been shared around vision, a need for a clear vision, need for leadership. And I know I'm looking for that out of this gubernatorial election. I want to feel passionate about the advocacy we're doing every day, and that we're making headway, and that I'm a lifelong Californian, like probably many of you. I'm not a SoCal girl, I'm a NorCal girl, but I've been doing this advocacy for a really long time, and I want to see acceleration. I want to see this stuff move, and I feel the energy in this room, and I'm really hoping we see that come out in this gubernatorial election, and we see that visioning come to form. Part of my job on the regular is to work with our broader advocacy team at United, at Advanced Energy United, and our technology companies that are members, to sort of spread that clean energy vision across the states. We're active in over 20 states. What I can tell you is, California is no longer the only state focused on building a clean energy economy, right? Clean energy solutions are now seen as affordable solutions in many states. Look at Texas, where we are seeing a lot of these technologies blossom, bloom, where they are being invested in more so than the sort of fossil counterparts that traditionally have been a focus for these states. So again, a lot of build out happening across the nation, and what we're seeing where states have speed in implementation, where states have focus in implementation, they are getting that investment. And I don't want California to lose out on that, right? We have an opportunity here with new leadership to continue that engagement, continue that leadership, but that will require vision. That will require really focusing in on what are the solutions we can deploy now that are people-oriented, to Alvaro's point. How can we ensure that people are feeling that change, they're seeing that change in their electricity bill, and that we are focused on making it easier for folks to pay their household bills. That means we need to focus more on the distributed grid, right? We gotta focus more on those flexibility solutions that can really enable and utilize, aggregate all of those resources. I think Sunrun was talking about it earlier today, right? We have all of these home batteries, we have rooftop solar, we have the opportunity to invest in more of that for the people that need it. And that should be the vision, that should be part of the mission for this next leader of the state of California. I'm hoping to see some of that really come out in the next term, in the next 2 years leading up to 2028. What an opportunity, right? Where everyone is gonna be looking at LA, everyone's gonna be looking at California. And what an opportunity for the next governor to really put out a plan in the first 100 days, talking about how we're gonna really focus in, double down on scaling sort of that VPP vision, scaling DERs, and then continuing the momentum and showing how we can lead even when there's adversity in terms of sort of federal challenges and other sort of litigation that is happening. I will say the other thing that we are seeing across the states is, even in the face of federal challenges, whether it's lawsuits, some of our companies are being sued, projects are being stalled, even in the face of all of that, the states are resilient. And the states are actually the drivers of change, right? So having California continue lead the way is really important as we look at this moment and look at the next 8 years.
Thank you. This isn't on the official questions, but I thought about it, Alvaro, in your previous role at Green Lighting Institute, you used to think a lot, and you and I talked about this, as we were thinking about the Biden administration and the massive investment into disadvantaged communities, and our communities prepared for it. We're at a different time and place now. It's more of how do we prioritize environmental justice issues. Have you given thought to that as the next administration? We elect the next governor and the next administration comes into office?
Yeah, 100%. And as such, I'm launching an initiative called Blueprints for Belonging. Because one of the observations that I have made over the decade-long work here in California, trying to deploy resources to underserved communities, to make those communities healthier, cleaner, more thriving, prosperous, and then ultimately with the Biden-Harris administration and seeing the ambition of a vision of a lot of resources going out to communities to be able to make these kinds of changes, the linchpin that didn't allow that to be as successful as it could have been, even in the short time that it was there, it was how fragile our civic infrastructure is. We're not ready to implement these kinds of visions. And the best ideas, the most ambitious policies, programs, they require us to work with each other. And we are consistently undervaluing and underfunding the ability of us to learn how to work with each other. And when we do that, it doesn't allow these ambitious policies that are highly technical, sometimes contentious, sometimes long-term, to actually do the changes that they need to do. And most consistently, when we achieve a victory, some type of win, that civic infrastructure just goes away because we're unable to sustain it for the long term. In my opinion, now this is coming for us and it looks like the threat on democracy that we're seeing across the country. And I think to me, that's our inability to sustain our ability to work with each other, to understand where we're coming from, and the actual science that it takes to find common ground. So how do we do this moving forward, and how do we bring this to bear? In my opinion, the next governor has to take this really, really seriously, that we all have to feel like we are participating in the effort of moving forward in the same direction, following the vision that we all agree that we want to be leading us. But ultimately, there has to be a way for us to figure out how to participate in that effort and not feel like something is happening to us, but rather that we are contributing to the solution. And that's going to take a lot of effort. Luckily, the state of California has a ton of resources and programs that can achieve that goal. But what we're lacking is a concrete vision of where we want to go and an ability to coordinate and maximize the resources in an intentional way to build the kind of civic infrastructure throughout the state that we need in order to make the kind of progress that we need to make. So I would start there, investing in enduring long-term civic infrastructure, because it's not going to take just 2 administrations. This is a project of many, many years, but we all have to feel like we have a seat at the table and that we can actually influence the way that the state is moving.
Thank you for that. Mary, you touched on this a bit already in terms of how do we frame, for the next governor, make sure that they frame climate progress and affordability going hand in hand. You addressed that in part. But one thing I wanted to add to that is we as LACI, as an organization, we're not talking as much about it today. Earlier saw some of our startup founders, but we really lean into the notion that policymakers send market signals to entrepreneurs. We've seen that, of course, in now a common referred to entrepreneur, of course, is Elon Musk, thanks to the ZEV mandate. It gave him the cash flow to be able to go through one of or a couple of his valleys of death, and the state getting behind the Fremont plant and the partnership there, and on and on. There are many other entrepreneurs who have thrived thanks to the climate policies because they did what the legislature or CARB or others wanted them to do. They responded to the call, to respond to that call. How do you see the governor and the next governor, of course, in the legislature? Because we've seen shifts in each of the houses in Sacramento, in the Assembly, and in the Senate. How do we continue to make sure not just that we lead on addressing climate action and affordability at the same time, but really those signals that are really such powerful forces and why we've grown, in part, grown to the 4th largest economy in the world?
Okay, such a good point. So first, you've heard most of us mention this tension between affordability, the economy, and climate. Let's be clear, that's a big hustle. Oil companies said climate change wasn't real for decades. Guess what? That's not working anymore. There's real survivors, many of them, across the country from the disasters of the climate crisis. So now they're saying that climate action is too expensive, that we can't afford it. The reason we're even talking about this right now on the stage is because they have been running a public marketing campaign for years on this that is like infiltrated. But let me tell you this, it's infiltrated deeply in Sacramento, it's taken over DC, but it has not infiltrated voters. Voters are not buying it. They aren't there. They are connecting the dots that clean energy is cheaper, more reliable, and safer. They are seeing that across party lines, they want those solutions. They want investments in resilience. They know that makes them healthier and safer. But the people who are falling for it are legislators. Voters know that extreme weather events are why their insurance bills are going up, why their energy bills are going up, why groceries are more expensive, why water is scarce and more expensive. They know that. Legislators in Sacramento are getting confused with checks to their bank accounts. But what I would say is this. What's really exciting about this is part of the reason oil has gotten so worked up about this and has run this really significant, highly resourced, and powerful campaign is because they see the end. We've talked about it, but we're in a world in which literally Australia has gone all in on these solutions around clean energy, and they're at a place now where between 12 and 3 p.m., they are giving away free energy. I'm going to say that again. We are in a place in our country where energy affordability is like the top issue in the election this year because people cannot afford their energy rates. It is insane. In Australia, they've doubled down on clean energy, and now they tell people if you run in your home, your dryers, your washing machines, between 12 and 3, your energy is free. That's where we're headed. 2/3 of our energy is already clean. So it's just a matter of time before the gig is up. And the leaders that are going to be successful moving forward are going to be the ones who lean into the cheaper, more reliable, and safer option for communities. Because guess what? When Trump decides to wage an illegal war across the world, if we're using clean energy, transportation doesn't become more expensive. That's the reality. Now, I'll say this. What our governor needs to do is, one, financing. We have to fund this transition. A lot of our regulations are having challenges because of federal rollbacks, but we have to fund this transition. That's reinstating cap and invest funding, that's bonds, that's the general fund, that is looking at funding from corporate polluters. Oil should be at the table paying their fair share for the damage they are causing. It's financing. All the tools in the toolbox to transition to clean energy, clean transportation, and resilience. It is regulation. As Matt mentioned, we have a responsibility as the 4th largest economy in the world to signal that we aren't giving up in transitioning to clean transportation and clean energy. Because the reality is the federal government is rolling things back, as California has spent the last year propping up the fossil fuel industry with government investments and giveaways. We have to signal in the next few years, guess what? We are staying the course, clean energy is the future, we're on target. If we don't do that, global companies won't continue to change. The last thing is we need a governor who is going to collaborate with the legislature. And what I mean by that, one that comes out in January at the beginning of the year and say, here's what we're tackling, here's what we're taking on. These are the 1 to 2 big issues that we need to lead on as a state. Senate, Assembly, work on some bills, bring me a package. We haven't had that in years, no shade. We have not had that in years. We need that type of leadership every year in collaboration with the legislature to make sure that we have policies that are moving forward to advance clean energy, transportation, resilience, water resources for all Californians.
Thank you, Mary. You're here. Amisha, you talked about that California is not the only state leading now. We also see, whether it's cities or states, the need for regional collaboration. What sort of opportunities do you see for the next governor to champion progress through regional collaboration?
So on the energy side of the spectrum, right, over the past couple of years, we saw a tremendous amount of cooperation and organization around sort of building up toward a Western regional organization, Western RTO, which is really getting states across the West to work together to think about how to better build out transmission lines so that we're not overbuilding. Also, finding ways to maximize energy delivery across state lines so that we are saving ratepayer dollars in the process. So that process is really underway now and is moving forward. So I think the next governor, what I'm hoping to see, there we go. What I'm hoping to see is that the next governor actually just continues that progress and continues California's leadership and engagement in that regional conversation. I think the broader sort of opportunity for the next governor when it comes to leadership in the region, leadership across the nation is showing how to get this done, right? How to actually implement some of these goals. And that's going to require taking on the status quo, right? To Mary's point, it's not, if we just continue as we are today, we're not going to have the regulatory structures, we're not going to have the financial structures to actually see the progress we want to see and meet the goals that we want to actually meet. So we're going to have to actually do some reforming of existing structures. We're going to have to actually think about how we finance the future and make sure that everyone's a part of that. And really set the model for the rest of the nation so others in the region and others across the nation can see that California can actually get it right and that we know how to meet our climate goals, but also how we can actually move on clean energy affordably for ratepayers across the country.
Thank you. Liane, you know from your role as CARB chair, our work together in the Transportation Electrification Partnership, accelerating the move to EVs on light-duty cars, on buses and trucks. is really important, but it's not the entirety of the challenge. To get to our GHG and climate goals, we need to get more people out of their cars and into transit. What do you think the next governor can do? And by the way, I double click on what was said earlier. Metro did a fantastic job during the World Cup. If you experienced it, I went to a game and rode their last mile system. It was they did a phenomenal job, and they did educate people. And they made, if you could, riding a bus fun and sexy during the World Cup when we need to keep that happening. But what can the next governor do to make sure transit is competitive? We see this financing challenge. I was talking to a reporter earlier about this. How do we help regional agencies and local agencies do the job they need to do?
Well, I would say a couple things. First, and as I think Senator Allen alluded to, California just has sort of a different cultural relationship with transit than I think other parts of the country, and really finding ways to link people with their transit system. And unfortunately, the pandemic really kind of set us back, right? Because people felt less safe on transit. I live in the Bay Area. One of those Northern California state policymakers, but BART ridership crashed, and there was really a sort of a safety effect to that. People felt less comfortable on the system. And so BART has really made a big effort to encourage more sort of ridership and comfort with the system. They've instituted infrastructure changes and ensured that people were feeling safe on the system again. So that's important. But also we know the reality is that for transit to work well, it needs to be a lot of places and it needs to come regularly. It needs to be able to meet people's commute patterns and their lives. And what BART found was that even though the standard commute numbers went down dramatically, as ridership increased, what you were seeing was much more consistency in terms of ridership across the weekend, evenings. So you had, of course, shift workers who never stopped using transit, but you also had people using transit for more social events, cultural events, sporting events. And so they sort of worked on meeting the moment to try to ensure that those events and opportunities had service and that they invested in that service. So I think that's important. I loved the term station activation. So my local BART station actually had a prom a couple months ago in the parking lot. It was like an 80s theme prom. I didn't know there was a word for that, station activation, getting people out there and feeling closer to their transit systems. And lastly, all of that needs funding, to the point Mary made, that's just the reality, is that we need to invest in these systems so that they can be creative and they can bring people onto the system, they can make people feel comfortable, they can make people want to use the service. And as we're going to be dealing with lots of budgetary challenges with, the healthcare funding from the federal government being drastically cut, other funding being drastically cut, it's really incumbent upon us as a state to remind our legislature and governor that we still need services and we still need strong transit and, of course, more housing close to the transit.
Hear, hear. Well, I just want to thank each of you for the work you do every day, your leadership you brought and exhibited on this panel, and we've got some work to do to make sure this is all a priority for the next governor, but we do know that elections matter and your voice matters, and that's really what this is about today, is not just commitments to action, but really helping people connect the dots and see what's possible through something, a cultural moment as the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games.